The silence of the nursery shattered in an instant. One moment, the soft hum of lullaby music filled the room, the faint scent of baby powder drifting through the air like comfort itself. The next, sharp words cut through the stillness like glass breaking. "Are you out of your mind, Grace? My child cannot drink your filthy milk." Evelyn Harrington's voice was cold, controlled deadlier than a scream. Grace Williams froze, her brown eyes widening in shock. She had been rocking little Oliver in her arms, soothing him after hours of relentless crying. The formula shipment hadn't arrived, and with no other option, she had given the baby her own milk. It wasn't an act of defiance, but of desperation and love, a choice any caregiver would make when a child was suffering. Yet now, standing before the mother of that very child, she felt condemned for her compassion. "Please, Mrs. Harrington, I can explain," Grace began, her voice trembling beneath the weight of fear. "You will do no such thing," Evelyn snapped, cutting her off. "Put my son down this instant." Grace obeyed without hesitation, gently laying Oliver back in his crib. The baby gurgled contentedly, unaware of the storm swirling around him. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She grabbed Grace by the arm, dragging her out of the nursery and into the hallway. Her words dripped with venom. "You think you belong here? That your body is worthy of my son? Look at you. Your skin, your place in this world, you disgust me." The slap came fast, the sound echoing louder than the lullaby still whispering in the background. Grace staggered, stunned into silence. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She hadn't acted out of arrogance, nor to overstep boundaries. She had simply fed a hungry child. Yet Evelyn saw no sacrifice, no care, only insult. With one final order to her staff, she demanded Grace's belongings be packed and her presence erased from the house forever. The nursery door slammed shut, but the weight of that moment did not end there. For Oliver would soon cry again, and Evelyn would learn that control could not soothe hunger and cruelty could never replace compassion. The mansion had never felt so quiet. Once, Evelyn Harrington believed silence was a luxury, a reward for control. Her days had been scheduled to the minute: meetings with executives, consultations with nutritionists, sleep trainers, and pediatric specialists. Everything in her life had been designed, curated, and perfected. But that night, the silence in the nursery was not peace. It was absence. Oliver's cries had been relentless since Grace left. At first, Evelyn had dismissed them as fussiness, the natural restlessness of a child. She prepared the emergency formula herself, following the pediatrician's instructions step by step. She warmed the bottle to the exact temperature, cradled her son at the perfect angle, and whispered the lullabies her nanny had once sung to her as a child. Yet Oliver turned away, arching his back, screaming until his tiny fists clenched white. The shrieks pierced Evelyn in a way no shareholder's criticism or boardroom challenge ever had. For the first time, she felt powerless. And though she tried to bury the thought, she knew the truth. Oliver had not cried like this when Grace held him. In Grace's arms, his chest had risen and fallen in easy rhythm, his small lips curving into the faint smile of a child who felt safe. Evelyn shook the memory away, muttering to herself that it had been coincidence, nothing more. Still, her hands trembled as she placed Oliver back in the crib, his sobs echoing into the vast, empty house. By the following morning, exhaustion gnawed at her composure. She instructed her assistant to run a full background check on Grace Williams. "It's not paranoia," she told herself as she sipped her coffee, untouched and bitter. "It's due diligence. I need to know who I allowed near my son." The report arrived within hours, delivered in a slim envelope. Evelyn opened it briskly, expecting to find something disqualifying, some hidden stain that would justify her anger, her cruelty. But what she saw instead unraveled her carefully constructed certainty. Grace Denise Williams. Age 29. Former neonatal intensive care nurse. Westlake General Hospital. Terminated due to budget cuts. Guardian of 2 nieces. Ages 8 and 10. No criminal record. Attached was a faded photograph. Grace in pale blue scrubs, hair pulled back, cradling a premature infant barely larger than her palms. Beneath the image, a scanned note read, "Nurse Williams saved our baby's life." A family testimonial, scrawled in handwriting that radiated raw gratitude. Evelyn's throat tightened. She set the papers down, her fingers trembling. The memory of her own words returned with brutal clarity. "You disgust me. Your body is not worthy of my Child. She had hurled those knives at a woman who had once fought to keep fragile newborns alive. A woman who now raised 2 orphaned girls without complaint. Evelyn had slapped not just Grace, but the integrity of someone far stronger than herself. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt ashamed. 2 days passed, and Oliver's restlessness grew worse. He refused the bottle, whimpered through the night, and rejected even her most tender attempts to soothe him. The nannies cycled in and out, each trying their methods, but none succeeded. And with every cry, Evelyn felt the weight of her mistake pressing heavier. On the 3rd evening, against every instinct of pride and control, Evelyn typed an address into her car's GPS, the small apartment listed on Grace's emergency file. The drive was short, but each second crawled like penance. When she pulled into the cracked parking lot, the sight of rusted balconies and children playing with broken toys struck her like a foreign world. She stepped out of her sleek SUV, her heels clicking on uneven cement, and approached the door. With a hesitation she had never known in a boardroom. The door opened slowly. Grace stood there, her face expressionless, a faint bruise still visible, where Evelyn's hand had struck days before. Behind her, a small girl peeked nervously from Manation 70 of behind a curtain. Grace wore a faded sweatshirt, her curls tied back loosely, her posture calm, but guarded. Evelyn swallowed hard. "May I come in?" Grace studied her for a long moment, long enough for Evelyn to feel every ounce of her shame settle into her bones. Finally, Grace stepped aside. The apartment was bare but spotless. The faint scent of canned beans and baby lotion lingered in the air. Sparse furniture lined the walls, and on a small table lay 2 schoolbooks with childish handwriting scribbled across the pages. Evelyn sat on the couch, careful not to wrinkle her blouse, her voice unsteady for the first time she could remember. "I came to apologize," she began. "For what I said. For what I did. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I'm sorry." Grace remained silent. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "I reviewed your background," Evelyn continued, forcing the words out. "I know who you are, what you've done. I was blinded by my own expectations. But Oliver hasn't been the same since you left." "I haven't been the same." Still, Grace said nothing. Her expression softened slightly, but her silence was louder than Evelyn's apology. Desperate, Evelyn reached into her handbag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I want to offer you a new position," she said, her voice faltering. "Not as a maid. As head infant care specialist. With a salary 5 times what you earned before. I want you to come back." The room was still. Grace finally spoke, her voice low, carrying the weight of a lifetime of dismissal. "Do you see me now?" Evelyn's chest tightened. She nodded. "I do." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, in that small apartment with peeling paint and fragile hope, something shifted. 2 women, divided by race, class, and pride, sat across from one another. And for the first time, Evelyn Harrington wasn't a billionaire or a mother seeking control. She was simply a woman seeking forgiveness. The storm arrived faster than Evelyn Harrington could have imagined. It began with whispers online, then a headline, and within 24 hours, her name was splashed across every news ticker in the country. Tech billionaire slaps black caretaker over breastfeeding incident. Her phone vibrated endlessly. Emails poured in from lawyers, publicists, and board members. A crisis management team demanded immediate action, but Evelyn couldn't bring herself to listen. Instead, she sat in Oliver's nursery, staring at her son, as he finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The image of Grace holding him calm, safe, content, haunted her like a wound she couldn't bandage. By morning, the footage appeared. Someone had leaked the Harrington estate's own security tapes. The nursery scene unfolded for millions of viewers. Grace's trembling explanation. Evelyn's icy rage, the venom-laced words. "You disgust me. Your body is not worthy of my child." And then the slap. Evelyn watched the video once. That was enough. She remembered saying it, remembered the heat of her anger, but seeing it replayed, stripped of context, it was uglier than she had ever allowed herself to admit. There was no context strong enough to excuse cruelty. Her assistant's voice broke through the haze. "Ma'am, we need a statement. Immediately." "No spin," Evelyn whispered, her throat raw. "No excuses, I'll write it myself." She sat at her desk, the words spilling slower than any annual report or press release she had ever drafted. She wrote not as a CEO, not as a woman desperate to salvage her empire, but as a mother who had failed both her son and the woman who once protected him. There are moments that change you, whether you want them to or not. I made a decision out of fear, ignorance, and control. And in doing so, I hurt someone who only ever showed my child love. Grace Williams is not just an employee. She is a caregiver, a nurse, a guardian to her nieces, and a woman of profound integrity. I failed her. And in failing her, I failed my son. There is no excuse, but there can be accountability. Grace has my respect, my apology, and my support for as long as she'll accept it. I will not be issuing further statements. I will be listening. When she hit send, the silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The internet erupted. Some called it redemption, others mocked it as damage control. Commentators debated on morning shows. Was this an awakening or a ploy? But beneath the chaos, one thing was undeniable. Evelyn Harrington, a woman once untouchable, was now human. Her mistakes were laid bare, and her path forward would be judged not by words, but by what she did next. Grace saw the letter, though not immediately. A neighbor forwarded the link late that evening. Sitting at her kitchen table, her nieces asleep in the next room, she read it slowly. The words were unexpected, raw, unpolished, even trembling. But words alone had never moved her. She had spent years watching men in suits promise change while mothers buried their babies. The following day, Evelyn appeared again at Grace's modest apartment. This time, she arrived, without bodyguards or drivers. She carried only a slim folder and eyes that looked heavier than before. Grace opened the door cautiously. Her nieces lingered nearby, watching as Evelyn stepped inside and took a seat at the worn kitchen table. I owe you more than an apology, Evelyn began, her voice tight. I owe you my name, my influence, my resources. And I want to use them. For you. For women like you. For the children who deserve better than silence. Grace crossed her arms. And what does that look like exactly? Evelyn slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed documents. An official proposal, funding pledges, draft plans. I want to start a foundation. A real one. Training, scholarships, healthcare, legal protections for caregivers, especially women of color. And I want you to lead it. Grace's eyes flicked across the pages, then back to Evelyn. Why? Guilt? Saving your reputation? Evelyn didn't flinch. Because I saw my son happier in your arms than he's ever been in. Mina. Because I realized the world would rather punish you for feeding a child than praise you for saving one. That's not justice. And I want to change that. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the refrigerator filled the air. Grace leaned back, her expression cool. You think one foundation makes up for what you said? No, Evelyn replied softly. But it's a start. For the first time, something in Grace's guarded expression shifted. Her shoulders relaxed. Slightly, her gaze less sharp. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But she was willing to consider. I'll return, Grace said finally, her voice steady. But on my terms. Evelyn exhaled, relief mingling with fear. Tell me what they are. Grace's tone sharpened. I will not be a token face for your philanthropy. If I come back, it won't be as an employee, it will be as a leader. I want full authority over the program, the curriculum, the hiring. And I want the power to ensure that this initiative isn't just a bandage for your reputation, but a lifeline for women who've been ignored for too long. Evelyn nodded without hesitation. Done. Grace tilted her head, studying her. You say that now. But power doesn't like to be shared. Can you handle it? Evelyn's gaze was unflinching. I don't want to handle it. I want to hand it over. To you. The moment was fragile, unspoken truths weighing the air, but something had shifted. Grace was no longer a dismissed caretaker. She was a woman negotiating from strength. And Evelyn, once blinded by pride, was learning that leadership sometimes meant stepping aside. That night, as Evelyn returned to her mansion, she passed Oliver's nursery door. She paused, watching her son sleep peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope that he might smile again, not because of her control, but because of Grace's presence. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Harrington understood that redemption could never be bought with money or managed by PR teams. It had to be built through surrender, humility, and the courage to give someone else the power to lead. The launch of the Second Mothers Initiative began not with a press conference or a glossy campaign, but with a modest gathering in a converted church basement. Folding chairs lined the space, the faint smell of coffee, mingling with the perfume of fresh flowers donated by a Prachna local shop. At the front, a banner read in bold letters, "Every child deserves a mother's love. Every mother deserves support." Grace Williams adjusted the microphone nervously, her palms damp with sweat. She had faced NICU emergencies, held infants weighing less than 2 pounds, and carried the grief of families when hope was lost. But standing here, as the chosen director of a national initiative, her voice quivered. Evelyn Harrington stood just behind her, impeccably dressed, yet subdued, allowing Grace the stage. That had been their agreement. Evelyn would provide funding, connections, and visibility, but Grace would lead the mission. This was no vanity project. This was Grace's vision, born from the struggles she had endured. Grace cleared her throat, steadying herself. "When I was 15, she began, my sister died, giving birth to twins. I became their guardian, their nurse, their second mother. Later, as a twins NICU nurse, I watched countless families, especially mothers of color, fight battles not only against illness, but against systems that failed to see them. Today, with the support of many, we are founding the Second Mothers Initiative to ensure no caregiver is ever silenced, dismissed, or left without resources." The room erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. A local news camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the raw sincerity that no press agent could fabricate. Evelyn clapped, too, her eyes fixed on Grace, not with pride of ownership, but with respect for a leader who had claimed her rightful place. Within weeks, the initiative gained traction. What started as a basement meeting became headlines. From scandal to solidarity, Harrington and Williams launched Second Mothers Fund. Editorials debated whether Evelyn's involvement was redemption or strategy, but all agreed on one thing: the mission mattered. The foundation's first programs were direct and urgent. Scholarships for aspiring neonatal nurses of color. Legal aid for caregivers battling discrimination. Emergency grants for women raising children not biologically theirs, grandmothers, aunts, foster parents, who too often went unsupported. Grace designed each program with precision, drawing from years of lived experience. She worked tirelessly, often late into the night at her kitchen table while her nieces did homework beside her. The girls would peek over her shoulder at the documents and whisper, "Auntie, are you saving babies again?" Grace would smile and nod, though in truth, she was building something larger than saving. She was building a movement. Evelyn, meanwhile, leveraged her wealth and influence. She arranged meetings with state senators, secured tax incentives for hospitals that partnered with the initiative, and convinced CEOs to match donations. But she remained in the background, a role she accepted with surprising grace. She had once craved control, now, she understood her redemption came through surrender. The turning point came when national television requested an interview, not with Evelyn, but with Grace. Sitting beneath studio lights, Grace wore a simple navy blazer, her hair tied neatly, her voice calm but powerful. "What does the phrase second mothers mean to you?" the anchor asked. Grace answered without hesitation. "It means the woman who steps in when no one else will. The aunt who raises her nieces. The foster mother who loves children society has forgotten. The nurse who cradles an infant at 3 a.m., when the parents are too exhausted to stand. These women are the backbone of our communities. And for too long, their labor has been unity's invisible. Our initiative is about making it visible and valuable." The clip went viral overnight. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up by the hundreds. City councils requested local chapters. Soon, the Second Mothers Initiative wasn't just an organization, it was a movement. Social media lit up with the hashtag #SecondMothersRise. Women shared stories of their grandmothers, sisters, and mentors who had been their second mothers. Photos filled timelines, smiling children embraced by women who had loved them into thriving. Grace, once dismissed as an employee, unworthy of respect, now stood before auditoriums filled with cheering supporters. She trained new leaders, built partnerships with universities, and created a certification program for caregivers. Her name became synonymous with resilience and integrity. Evelyn, though often questioned for her motives, found her place as well. She became the quiet benefactor, writing checks that sustained programs, testifying before Congress about the checks, importance of caregiver equity, and, most importantly, listening. She no longer sought applause. She sought change. The greatest vindication came when the city council passed a resolution honoring the second mother's initiative as a model for national policy. Grace accepted the award, standing at the podium with her nieces beside her. "This is not about me," she told the crowd. "This is about every woman who has ever been told she doesn't belong, and every child who has ever cried for comfort. We are here to say, you are seen, you are valued, and you are never alone." Evelyn watched from the audience, tears blurring her vision. She thought of the day she had slapped Grace in rage, and how easily history could have gone another way. Yet here they were, not enemies, not employer and employee, but partners in something larger than either of them could have built alone. As the applause thundered, Grace's nieces tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Auntie, you're like a superhero." Grace laughed softly. "No, baby. I'm just a second mother." And in that moment, the world seemed to understand that being a second mother was not second place. It was power. It was legacy. It was love strong enough to reshape an entire society. The success of the Second Mother's Initiative had made Grace Williams a national figure. She stood on stages, gave interviews, and carried herself with the steady confidence of someone finally recognized for her worth. Yet behind the applause and the headlines, she carried a memory she had buried for years, a memory that still tightened her chest at night. It happened during her final months at Westlake General Hospital. Grace had been a NICU nurse then, exhausted but devoted, spending long shifts caring for fragile newborns. One evening, she walked into a restricted wing and witnessed something that chilled her blood. Dr. Stephen Elridge, a senior physician with powerful ties to hospital administration, had authorized an experimental treatment on a premature infant without proper consent from the family. The procedure endangered the child, and Grace suspected it wasn't the first time. She reported her concerns to her supervisor. The response was swift and brutal, a closed-door meeting where she was told to stop making noise. A hospital lawyer warned her that pursuing the matter could cost her license, her livelihood, even custody of her nieces. Fear forced her into silence. Shortly after, Westlake announced budget cuts and Grace's position was eliminated. For years, she carried that secret alone. But as Second Mother's Initiative grew, journalists began digging into her past. Whispers surfaced, and finally, an investigative reporter approached her with documents leaked emails from Westlake administrators suggesting a solemn cover-up of malpractice. Grace felt her old fear return, but this time she was not the same woman. She had a platform, a movement, and a community behind her. She agreed to speak. The revelation detonated across the media. Second Mother's director accuses hospital of malpractice cover-up. Evelyn Harrington's crisis team braced for fallout, but Evelyn herself stood firm beside Grace. "Tell the truth," she urged. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The backlash was immediate. Anonymous threats arrived by phone and email. Rumors circulated online, branding Grace a liar chasing fame. A smear campaign painted her as unstable, unprofessional, even negligent in her own care of patients. But every attempt to silence her only hardened her resolve. The government soon reopened the case. Subpoenas were issued, and Grace was called as the primary witness. Walking into the courthouse that first day, she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She wasn't just testifying for herself, she was testifying for every nurse silenced by power, every mother who lost a child to negligence, every community dismissed by those in authority. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Dr. Elridge sat across the aisle, his posture calm, his expensive suit immaculate. He radiated arrogance, as though certain that his influence and connections would shield him from consequence. Grace sat tall, clutching her notes, refusing to meet his eyes. The questioning was relentless. Lawyers for the defense tried to break her, twisting her words, accusing her of fabricating memories for publicity. They dissected her career, her financial struggles, even her decision to breastfeed Oliver on that fateful day, as if her compassion disqualified her credibility. But Grace did not falter. Her voice wavered at times, but her truth did not. "I saw what I saw," she repeated, steady as stone. "And a child's life was risked because of it." The turning point came when new evidence emerged. Internal hospital records, smuggled out by a former employee who had watched the scandal unfold in silence. The documents confirmed Grace's testimony. Elridge had signed off on unauthorized treatments multiple times, and administrators had conspired to bury the incidents. The courtroom gasped as the papers were read aloud. The defense crumbled. One by one, witnesses stepped forward, emboldened by Grace's courage. Other nurses confessed similar experiences of intimidation and cover-ups. Families came forward with stories of unexplained complications and whispered warnings from hospital staff. The tide turned irreversibly. The trial stretched for weeks, each day peeling back layers of corruption. Finally, the verdict arrived. Dr. Stephen Elridge was convicted of gross negligence and malpractice. Several administrators faced charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Westlake General Hospital was forced into sweeping reforms under government oversight. Grace walked out of the courthouse to a wall of flashing cameras. Reporters shouted her name, questions flying in every direction. For a moment, she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the noise, the lights, the weight of victory. Then Evelyn appeared beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Grace raised her chin, her voice carrying above the chaos. This is not about me. This is about justice. For years, caregivers have been silenced, patients ignored, and families betrayed. Today, we prove that silence is not stronger than truth. And tomorrow, we continue. The crowd erupted in cheers. Headlines the next day called her the voice of justice. Yet for Grace, the triumph was not about titles or recognition. It was about standing in that courtroom and refusing to be small. It was about facing the man who once seemed untouchable and proving that no one is beyond accountability. Back at home, her nieces hugged her tightly, whispering, "We're proud of you, Auntie." Evelyn brought Oliver over, the baby gurgling happily in Grace's arms, as if sensing her relief. In that quiet moment, away from cameras and crowds, Grace felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace. The legal battle had scarred her, but it had also transformed her. She was no longer just the .wine nurse who had been silenced, nor only the leader of an initiative. She was a witness, a fighter, a symbol that truth could survive even the fiercest attempts to bury it. And in her heart, Grace knew, this was only the beginning. The fight for justice, for every mother, every child, every silenced voice, was far from over. But now, she had the strength, the allies, and the unshakable conviction to lead it. The courthouse victory was a personal triumph for Grace Williams, but in the days that followed, it became clear that her battle had grown far beyond herself. The headlines called her the voice of justice and the nurse who wouldn't be silenced. Yet when Grace looked at the flood of letters arriving at the Second Mother's Initiative office, she saw something deeper: hundreds of women, caregivers, and mothers pouring out their own stories, each one echoing the pain she had carried for years. Handwritten notes arrived from grandmothers raising grandchildren after their parents were incarcerated. Emails came from foster mothers who had faced discrimination when seeking medical care for their children. Social media posts tagged with number Second Mother's Rise filled timelines, a single mother posting a photo of the child she'd nursed back from illness. An aunt who had taken in her teenage niece after her sister passed. A retired nurse sharing how she was pushed out of her job for speaking up against malpractice. What began as a personal stand was now a collective chorus. Grace read each story late at night in her small office, sometimes wiping away tears. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was shouting into a void. She felt connected to a vast, unseen sisterhood that had been waiting for someone to say, "We see you. You matter." Evelyn Harrington noticed the momentum too. She had expected backlash from the trial, but, instead, the opposite happened. The movement grew. Donations skyrocketed. Local chapters of Second Mother's Initiative sprouted in cities across the country, each led by women who had once felt invisible, but now wanted to be part of something larger. At a national summit 6 months later, Grace stepped onto a stage in Washington, D.C., before an audience of policymakers, activists, and hundreds of second mothers from every corner of the country. Behind her, the screen displayed a simple phrase in bold letters: "Number Second Mother's Rise." 6 months ago, Grace began, her voice steady. "I stood in a courtroom and told the truth. But today, I stand here not for myself, but for all of you. For the grandmother who holds her grandchild at night while working 2 jobs. For the nurse who risks her career to speak up for her patients. For every woman told she is less than, when in truth, she is the backbone of her family and her community. We are no longer silent. We are rising." The room erupted in thunderous applause, many women standing with tears streaming down their faces. The hashtag spread beyond the summit. Within weeks, schools hosted Second Mothers Days, honoring caregivers of all kinds. Churches held community luncheons to celebrate women who had stepped into roles of sacrifice and love. Even corporations began to take notice, offering caregiver stipends to employees inspired by the movement's momentum. But with visibility came new challenges. Critics accused the initiative of politicizing motherhood. Some dismissed it as charity for the poor, undermining its systemic vision. Online trolls targeted Grace personally, spreading cruel rumors about her past. Yet Grace stood firm. Every movement faces resistance, she told her team. But resistance only proves we are pressing on the right wound. Evelyn provided the shield Grace sometimes needed. At political fundraisers, she spoke bluntly about her own failings, admitting that she had once been blind to the very struggles she now funded. "I can't change what I did," Evelyn confessed during a televised interview. "But I can make sure my resources support women like Grace, women who are the future of justice in this country." Slowly, government officials began to align with the cause. A bipartisan bill was introduced in Bill for Lyon and summoned to Congress, the Second Mothers Support Act. It proposed funding for neonatal caregiver training, financial assistance for non-biological guardians, and legal protections for caregivers facing workplace discrimination. Grace testified before the Senate committee, her voice carrying the same fire that had sustained her in court. Senators leaned forward, captivated not by a polished lobbyist, but by a woman who had lived the realities she described. "Caregiving is not charity," she told them. "It is infrastructure. Without it, no child thrives, no community stands, no nation survives." The bill passed with overwhelming support, a rare moment of unity in a fractured political landscape. For the first time in history, federal law recognized the value of second mothers. Back home, Grace's nieces watched the televised vote with wide eyes. "Auntie, you changed the law," one whispered. Grace pulled them close, her heart swelling. "No, baby," she said softly. "We changed it together." The impact rippled outward. Hospitals began partnering with Second Mothers Initiative to implement caregiver training programs. Universities offered scholarships for students who had served as guardians. Courts referenced the act in custody cases, giving legal standing to aunts, grandmothers, and foster mothers. Yet Grace refused to let the movement become a monument to her alone. She constantly pushed other women forward, appointing directors from diverse communities, spotlighting grassroots leaders, and ensuring the narrative was never about one savior, but about thousands rising together. One evening, at a community rally in Chicago, Grace stood in the back as another woman, an immigrant mother who had once been undocumented, took the microphone. "I am here because of the second mothers," the woman declared. "They showed me I am not invisible. They gave me a voice. And now I will use it." The crowd roared with approval. Grace smiled quietly, knowing this was the true victory. Not that she had found her voice, but that countless others had found theirs too. Evelyn watched all of this unfold with a humility she had never known. She had started this journey trying to control everything, believing her wealth gave her the right to dictate. Now, she saw her greatest gift was stepping back and letting others lead. Where once she had silenced Grace, she now amplified her. Where once she had dismissed mothers as help, she now recognized them as the architects of a nation. Years later, when people would look back on the Second Mothers Initiative, they would remember it, not only as an organization, but as a turning point. A movement that began with a single act of cruelty and transformed into a revolution of compassion. And at its heart was Grace Williams, the caretaker who refused to stay silent, who turned her personal scars into a banner others could rally beneath. She had shown the world that a second mother is not a replacement, but a force of resilience, justice, and unshakable love. As the movement's anthem declared, "We rise because they cannot fall. We lead because they must thrive. We are second mothers, and we will never be silent again." Justice, people often believe, is only born inside courtrooms, inside walls of marble and wood, where verdicts echo and sentences are passed. But Grace Williams's story proved otherwise. True justice was not simply about punishing the guilty, it was about rebuilding dignity where it had been broken, about restoring voices where silence had once been forced. It was found in the arms of a child, in the hands of women who refused to give up, in communities choosing compassion over cruelty. Evelyn Harrington's transformation showed the power of admitting one's failures and surrendering control. Grace's journey from a silenced nurse to a leader of a national SAR movement showed that even though society tries to diminish, can rise to become symbols of fairness, strength, and hope. Together, they reminded us that justice does not live only in laws, but in families, in communities, and in the unshakable force of maternal love. And here lies the lesson for us all. Change begins when we listen, truly listen, to those we once overlooked. It takes courage to admit we were wrong, and even greater courage to hand power to those who deserve it. Grace became a beacon not because she sought glory, but because she fought for a world where no caregiver, no child, no voice would ever be invisible again. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. What does justice mean to you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story of courage, love, and transformation. Together, let's rise, just as second mothers did.